After I was diagnosed with cancer, I lost my job, and my future wife left me. I first met Lily when we were both in college, back when I worked the early morning shift at a small cafe near campus. She'd come in almost every day, her oversized scarf swallowing half her face, always ordering a caramel latte with an extra shot of espresso. She was this whirlwind of energy who managed to look put together even with 3 textbooks and a bag that looked heavier than her. At the time, I was just the quiet guy at the counter, balancing work, classes, and the looming pressure of figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. I noticed her, of course. She was hard to miss, but to her, I was just a barista who never got her name wrong on the cup. One morning, as I handed her the latte, she casually mentioned the physics notes she was struggling with. That was the first real conversation we had, and it became a routine. I'd sneak in little tips or encouragements about her studies, and she'd thank me with a smile that felt like it could change the weather. When I mustered up the courage to ask her out toward the end of the semester, she declined, politely but firmly. "I'm flattered," she said, "but I don't think it's the right time for me." I convinced myself it was just timing, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. I kept working, pushing through school, and by graduation, I'd buried the memory of her rejection under the grind of building a career. After college, I landed a job in the tech industry, a role that turned into a real success story for me. I climbed the ranks quickly, moved to a better city, and eventually found myself comfortably settled into the life I'd once dreamed about as the guy working shifts at the cafe. But something always felt incomplete. I was achieving, sure, but it wasn't like I had anyone to share it with. Lily and I crossed paths again 5 years later. It was at a networking event, of all places. She was there launching her own line of handmade jewelry, and I was scouting opportunities for a side project. I hadn't seen her in years, but the way her face lit up when she saw me, it felt like a second chance I didn't know I needed. When Lily and I reconnected, it felt like picking up a conversation we'd never finished. We sat at a small round table at the edge of the event, far away from the noise and the clinking of glasses, catching up on everything that had happened since college. I told her about my move into tech, the long hours, the promotions, and the satisfaction of finally feeling like I'd made it. She shared her journey too, how she'd started her jewelry business from her apartment, selling pieces on Etsy before it grew into something bigger. Somewhere in the middle of all that catching up, the lightness of her laugh and the way she tucked her hair behind her ear brought back everything I'd felt years ago. But this time, it wasn't just a wistful crush. I wasn't the shy barista anymore. I was someone who could hold my own in a conversation with her, someone who could actually make her laugh and maybe, just maybe, keep her interested. The first time I asked her to dinner, I expected another polite rejection. But instead, she smiled, scribbled her number on the back of my business card, and said, "You're persistent, aren't you?" That dinner turned into another, and then another. Before I knew it, we were spending most weekends together, cooking at my place, or walking through her favorite spots in the city, little galleries, hidden parks, and thrift stores where she'd hunt for unique charms for her jewelry. It felt easy, natural, like this was how things were always supposed to be. Looking back, there were moments I thought were small at the time, but they'd stick with me. Like the time I surprised her with a necklace I'd commissioned, using one of her own designs as inspiration. She hugged me so tight I could barely breathe and said, "You're dangerous, you know that? Making a girl feel like this." Or the time she told me about her dream to open a brick-and-mortar boutique, and I stayed up all night sketching out rough plans and spreadsheets to help her figure out how to make it happen. She looked at me the next morning, bleary-eyed but smiling, and said, "I didn't think anyone believed in this as much as I do." At the time, I thought we were building something real. It wasn't just fun or casual. I was falling for her, and I genuinely believed she was falling for me too. As things between Lily and me grew more serious, it felt like life was finally clicking into place. A year into our relationship, we decided to move in together. Her tiny apartment was bursting at the seams with her jewelry-making supplies and my tech gadgets, so we found a cozy loft that gave us enough space to work and live without stepping on each other's toes. Living together made everything feel more real. We started falling into routines, Sunday mornings with coffee and crossword puzzles, late-night brainstorming sessions for her business, and me trying, and failing, to keep up with her love of hiking on weekends. Her jewelry business began to take off, and I was so proud of her. She'd pour her heart into every piece, and I'd do whatever I could to help. I built her an online store and set up her social media accounts. When she decided to open her boutique, I fronted part of the deposit for the space and helped her renovate it. Seeing her light up at the grand opening, surrounded by her creations and customers, was one of the happiest days of my life. At the same time, my career was thriving too. I was earning more than I ever thought possible back when I was pulling espresso shots and cramming for exams. With Lily beside me, it felt like we were unstoppable, a power couple chasing dreams together. A year later, I proposed. We were on a trip to the mountains, one of her favorite places. It was snowing lightly, and the air was so still it felt like the world was holding its breath. I remember fumbling with my words, trying to tell her how much she meant to me, how she'd made me believe in things I didn't know I wanted, like love, like a future with someone. She said yes. Her eyes were glistening as she threw her arms around me, and I remember thinking, this is it. This is my forever. The next few months flew by in a blur of wedding planning and more business milestones. Lily's boutique was thriving, and I was busy with a promotion that came with a hefty raise. Everything felt seamless, like the kind of life I'd always dreamed of, but better because she was in it. The first signs of trouble were easy to ignore at first, just some fatigue, a bit of weight loss. I chalked it up to stress. Between work, wedding planning, and trying to support Lily's boutique, I figured it was nothing a good night's sleep couldn't fix. But as weeks turned into months, the symptoms got harder to ignore. I started waking up drenched in sweat, my energy drained before the day even began. There were days I'd feel sharp, shooting pains in my chest or back, and my hands would tremble without warning. Lily pushed me to see a doctor, and I finally gave in. After several tests and tense days of waiting, I got the call that changed everything. Cancer. Hearing the word was like a punch to the gut. The doctor explained that it was lymphoma, treatable, but it would require aggressive rounds of chemotherapy. My world tilted. I had to step down from my position at work immediately to focus on my treatment, and suddenly the life I'd worked so hard to build felt like it was crumbling. Lily seemed supportive at first. She sat with me during that first doctor's appointment, holding my hand as the oncologist explained the treatment plan. "We'll get through this," she whispered. But even then, her grip felt more distant than comforting. The first round of chemo hit me like a truck. I was nauseous, weak, and barely able to keep food down. My hair started falling out in clumps, and looking in the mirror became a daily exercise in swallowing my pride. But worse than the physical toll was the growing distance between Lily and me. She started spending more time at her boutique, often coming home late, or distracted. When I asked if everything was okay, she'd say she was just overwhelmed with work and wedding planning. But her tone had changed, her patience was thinner, and her warmth had started to cool. When I told her we might need to scale back the wedding to manage our finances better, she nodded but didn't say much. A few days later, I overheard her on the phone with a friend. Her voice was low, but the words cut deep. "I don't know if I can handle this. He's not the same anymore. This isn't the life I signed up for." I froze, the weight of her words sinking in. That night I tried to talk to her, to ask her what she meant. She waved it off as frustration and stress. "I'm just venting," she said. "Don't overthink it." But I couldn't help it. As the days went on, I started noticing more cracks. She stopped coming to my chemo sessions, saying she couldn't take the time away from work. The arguments grew more frequent, about things as small as leaving dishes in the sink or forgetting to pick up something from the store. One night, after another blowout over something trivial, she blurted out, "I didn't sign up for this." It felt like a slap, one that left a sting long after the words had been said. I tried to tell myself she was just overwhelmed, that people say things they don't mean when they're stressed. But deep down, I knew the truth. Lily was pulling away. The distance between Lily and me became impossible to ignore. It was in the little things, the way she avoided eye contact when we talked, how her laughter felt forced when we were together, the growing silence that filled the spaces where we used to share our thoughts that I noticed it most during my chemo sessions. At first, she'd sit with me, holding my hand or reading quietly beside me. But as the weeks went on, her excuses started to pile up. "The boutique is so busy right now," she'd say. "I can't afford to miss another day." I tried to tell myself it was just stress, that she was doing her best to juggle everything. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't being entirely honest, not with me, not with herself. The turning point came during a conversation one evening. I'd been thinking about postponing the wedding, giving us both time to focus on what mattered most, my recovery and her business. "Lily," I said as we sat at the dinner table, "I think we should talk about the wedding." Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. "What about it?" "I think we should push it back," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't want to rush into this while we're both under so much stress. We could wait until things settle down." Her reaction wasn't what I expected. Instead of relief, she looked almost defeated. "You don't think we should get married?" she asked, her tone sharper than I'd ever heard. "That's not what I'm saying," I replied quickly. "I just think we need to give ourselves some breathing room. I want us to do this when it feels right, not because it's on the calendar." Her expression darkened. "Breathing room," she repeated. "That's easy for you to say when you're not the one handling all the plans, the bills, the business." Her voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. "What are you trying to say?" I asked, my stomach sinking. She pushed her chair back and stood, pacing the room. "I'm trying to say that this isn't what I signed up for," she said finally, her voice breaking. "I thought we were building a life together, something stable, something secure. But now, everything's falling apart, and I don't know if I can handle it." The words hit me harder than any chemo's side effect ever had. "You don't know if you can handle it," I echoed. "Handle me? I didn't mean it like that," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Then how did you mean it?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she sank into the couch, burying her face in her hands. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know anymore." Her admission felt like the final blow. It wasn't just the stress of the wedding, my illness, or her business. It was me. She'd fallen out of love with me, and she didn't have the strength, or the courage, to say it outright. That night, as I lay awake in bed, I realized the truth. Lily hadn't chosen me because of who I was, she'd chosen me because of what I represented. And now that the stability she craved was gone, so was her commitment. The days following that conversation were some of the hardest of my life. I kept replaying her words over and over, trying to figure out where we'd gone wrong. I wanted to believe that we could work through it, that maybe this was just her way of coping with the stress. But the truth became clearer with every passing day. Lily started spending more and more time at the boutique, coming home late, or sometimes not at all. When she was home, the distance between us felt insurmountable. We barely spoke, and when we did, the tension was unbearable. A week later, she came home one evening with a strained look on her face. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, avoiding my gaze. "We need to talk," she said. My heart sank. I already knew what was coming. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice trembling. "I've been trying, but this isn't the life I wanted. I don't think I can be the person you need right now." I nodded slowly, trying to keep my emotions in check. "So, what are you saying? You're leaving?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't deny it. "I think it's better if we end things now, before it gets worse." Her words cut deeper than I thought possible, but there was a strange sense of relief too. As much as I wanted to fight for us, I knew she had already given up. "Okay," I said quietly. "If that's what you want." She hesitated, as if waiting for me to argue, to beg her to stay. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. I'd spent so much energy fighting my illness, fighting to keep my life together. I didn't have anything left to fight for someone who didn't want to stay. The practicalities of her leaving were messy. She moved out within a week, taking her things and leaving behind a wave of unfinished plans. The wedding was cancelled, and I found myself fielding questions from family and friends about what had happened. I told them the truth, or at least part of it. It just wasn't the right time, I'd say. We both needed to focus on other things. What I didn't tell them was how it felt to watch her walk away, knowing she'd chosen to leave me when I needed her the most. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into my treatment. Chemo was brutal, but I kept going, finding strength in the routine. Slowly, I began to accept the new reality of my life, a reality without Lily. The weeks turned into months, and I found myself adjusting to life after Lily. The initial pain of her leaving was raw and all-consuming, but over time, it began to dull. My focus shifted to my health, my recovery, and finding pieces of myself that I'd neglected during our relationship. Chemo was still grueling, but I found a quiet strength in getting through it, day by day. Each session felt like a battle, and every small victory, feeling a bit stronger, eating a full meal, laughing at something on TV, was a reminder that I was still here, still fighting. In the quiet moments, I'd reflect on what had happened with Lily. For a long time, I blamed myself. Maybe if I'd handled things differently, she would have stayed. Maybe if I hadn't gotten sick, we'd still be together. But eventually, I realized something that changed everything. Her leaving wasn't about my illness. It was about who she was and what she valued. Lily hadn't fallen out of love with me because I got sick. She'd fallen out of love with me because I no longer fit the picture she'd built in her head. She wanted stability, security, and success. And when life threw us a curveball, she wasn't willing to adapt. As painful as that realization was, it brought me a strange sense of peace. I'd spent so much time trying to be the person Lily needed that I'd forgotten to ask if she was the person I needed. I learned a lot about myself in the months after she left. I learned that love isn't just about the good times. It's about standing beside someone when things are hard, messy, and uncertain. I learned that a true partner doesn't walk away when the foundation shakes. They help you rebuild it, brick by brick. Now, a year later, I'm still in recovery, but I'm in a much better place, physically and emotionally. I've reconnected with old friends, started therapy, and even picked up painting as a way to clear my head. As for Lily, I don't hold any bitterness toward her. In fact, I'm grateful she left when she did. Losing her was painful, but it gave me the chance to see the cracks in our relationship before we built a life on a foundation that would have never held. Looking back, I see my cancer diagnosis as a wake-up call, not just about my health but about the kind of life and love I want to build. I've learned that true partnership is about showing up, no matter how hard it gets. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful. And that, I think, is more valuable than any picture-perfect life I once thought I wanted.